The rain had started to fall lightly, just enough to make the cracks in the sidewalk shimmer. Daniel Harper tugged his worn-out jacket tighter around himself as he walked home, his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, skipping ahead, her small boots splashing in puddles. He should have been frustrated with her for getting her socks wet. He couldn't afford to replace them if they got ruined, but he didn't have the heart to stop her. She deserved a little joy. Daniel had been struggling for months. Ever since he lost his job at the auto repair shop, things had only gotten harder. He picked up side gigs where he could installing shelves, fixing leaky faucets, even assembling furniture for people who didn't have the patience to do it themselves. But it was never enough. The rent was overdue again, and the landlord had given him a final warning. "Daddy, can we get hot chocolate when we get home?" Lily asked, her voice hopeful. Daniel swallowed the lump in his throat. They were down to their last few groceries, and every dollar had to stretch. He forced a smile. "Maybe tomorrow, sweetheart." Lily didn't argue. She just nodded, her curls bouncing as she continued playing in the puddles. She was a good kid, too good for the life he was barely holding together. As they turned onto their street, Daniel spotted something strange. A woman, maybe in her late 70s, was standing near a bus stop, gripping her coat tightly. She looked confused, her gray curls damp from the rain. Her cardigan was buttoned wrong, and her shoes didn't match. One was a sneaker, the other a slipper. Daniel slowed down, his instincts kicking in. "Ma'am," he called gently, stepping closer. "Are you okay?" The woman blinked at him, then looked around as if she had no idea where she was. I think I was going home," she murmured. Lily moved closer to Daniel, watching the woman with curious eyes. "Are you lost?" she asked softly. The woman hesitated, then nodded. "I think so, my son. He was supposed to pick me up, but I don't know where he is." Daniel's heart ached. He had seen his own grandmother suffer from dementia before she passed. He knew the look of confusion, the fear in the eyes of someone who no longer trusted their own memory. "Do you have a phone with you?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. She patted her pockets clumsily, then shook her head. "I don't know." Daniel sighed. He didn't have much, but he couldn't just leave her here. "Do you know your name?" She hesitated again. Evelyn Parker." That name sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it. "Okay, Evelyn, let's figure out how to get you home." Lily tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy, maybe we can call someone." Daniel nodded. "That's a good idea." He pulled out his phone. "Do you know your son's name?" Evelyn frowned, as if trying to remember something just out of reach. "James. My son's name is James." Daniel typed the name into his phone, hopping for some kind of lead. He didn't know why, but something about the name Parker felt important. Then it hit him. James Parker was the owner of a big construction company in town. He had seen the name on trucks, on job listings he could never seem to land. "James Parker," he repeated. "I think I know how to find him." Evelyn smiled faintly. "He's waiting for me. I know he is." Daniel wasn't sure if that was true, but he nodded anyway. "Let's get you home." Lily reached for Evelyn's hand. "We'll help you." Evelyn squeezed her tiny fingers, and for the first time her expression softened. "You're very kind." Daniel didn't know what he was expecting when he called the number he found for James Parker's company, but he was surprised when a deep, worried voice answered almost immediately. "James Parker speaking." Hi, my name is Daniel Harper. I think I found your mother." There was silence on the other end, then a sharp intake of breath. "Where is she?" Daniel gave him their location, and James promised to be there in 10 minutes. Evelyn was getting restless by the time a sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb. A man in his 40s stepped out, his suit slightly wrinkled, his hair disheveled as if he had been running his hands through it all day. He looked exhausted, but the instant his eyes landed on Evelyn, relief flooded his face. "Mom," he breathed, rushing toward her. Evelyn's face brightened. James. James wrapped his arms around her, holding her tightly. I've been looking everywhere for you. Daniel felt a pang of sympathy. He knew how hard it was to care for someone with dementia. James looked up at him, his expression unreadable. Thank you, I don't even know how to. It's okay, Daniel interrupted. I just wanted to make sure she was safe. James studied him for a long moment, then glanced down at Lily, who was still holding Evelyn's hand. You have a good heart, he said quietly. Daniel shrugged. It's just the right thing to do. James nodded, then turned back to Evelyn. Let's get you home, Mom. Evelyn hesitated, looking at Daniel and Lily. Can they come visit me sometime? Daniel blinked in surprise, but Lily grinned. I'd love that. James looked at Daniel, as if waiting for an answer. Daniel hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, that would be nice. As James helped Evelyn into the car, he glanced back at Daniel again, an unreadable expression on his face. I'll be in touch. Daniel didn't think much of it as he and Lily continued their walk home. He was just glad Evelyn was safe. Little did he know, that simple act of kindness would change his life forever. The next morning, Daniel woke up early as he always did to look for work. He sat at the small kitchen table, his laptop open in front of him, scrolling through job listings while Lily ate a bowl of cereal across from him. He had long since stopped holding out hope for anything steady. Most of the listings were for part-time work or short-term gigs, jobs that wouldn't provide the stability he needed. Still, he tried. Daddy, do you think Mrs. Evelyn is okay? Lily asked between bites. Daniel glanced up from the screen and gave her a reassuring smile. I think so, sweetheart. Her son seemed really worried about her. I'm sure she's safe at home now. Lily nodded thoughtfully, then went back to her cereal. Daniel sighed and rubbed his temples. He had barely slept, his mind racing with worries about bills, food, and the constant weight of keeping everything together. He was running out of time. Just as he was about to close his laptop and head out to find day labor, his phone buzzed on the table. A number he didn't recognize flashed on the screen. Hello, he answered hesitantly. Mr. Harper, the voice on the other end was deep and firm. Yes. This is James Parker. Daniel straightened in his chair. He hadn't expected to hear from him again. Oh, Mr. Parker, is everything okay? There was a brief pause before James responded. Yes, my mother is doing fine, thanks to you. I wanted to thank you again for what you did last night. Most people wouldn't have stopped to help. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. It was nothing, I just did what anyone would do. I'm not so sure about that, James said. People are busy. They don't always take the time to look out for others. Daniel didn't know how to respond to that, so he stayed silent. James cleared his throat. Listen, I wanted to ask you something. Do you have a job right now? Daniel blinked in surprise. Not a steady one. I do odd jobs, handyman work, whatever I can find. Another brief pause. I see, you're good with your hands then. Yes, sir, Daniel said, unsure where this was going. James exhaled. I own a construction company, as you probably know. We're always looking for skilled workers. I'd like to offer you a temporary position, a trial run, if you will. If it works out, we can talk about something more permanent. Daniel's heart raced. A steady job, a real chance, but his excitement was quickly dampened by doubt. Mr. Parker, I appreciate the offer, but I don't want you to feel like you owe me anything because of what happened with your mother, he said carefully. James chuckled. This isn't charity, Mr. Harper. It's an opportunity. You helped my mother because you're a good man, not because you expected anything in return. That tells me something about your character, and I need people with character on my team. Daniel swallowed hard. The idea of a steady paycheck, of finally being able to provide for Lily without scrambling every week, was almost too much to hope for. He hesitated, looking at Lily, who was watching him with wide, curious eyes. James' voice softened. Think about it. Come by my office this afternoon if you're interested. If not, no hard feelings. Daniel let out a slow breath. Okay, I'll come by. Good, I'll see you later, Mr. Harper. James ended the call, leaving Daniel sitting in stunned silence. Lily tilted her head. What happened? Daniel blinked at her, then smiled. I think I might have a job. Lily's face lit up. Really? Daniel nodded. Yeah, sweetheart, really. For the first time in a long time, hope flickered in his chest. That afternoon, Daniel stood outside Parker Construction's main office, trying to steady his nerves. He had changed into his best clothes, an old button-down shirt, and the only pair of jeans without holes in them. It wasn't much, but it was the best he had. He took a deep breath and stepped inside. The receptionist looked up as he approached. Can I help you? I have a meeting with Mr. Parker, Daniel said. She nodded and picked up the phone. Mr. Parker, your appointment is here. A few moments later, James Parker himself appeared in the doorway. He was dressed in a crisp button-down and slacks, looking every bit the businessman, but his expression was warm. Daniel, he said, extending a hand, glad you came. Daniel shook his hand, still feeling slightly out of place. Thank you for having me. James led him into a spacious office and motioned for him to sit. I won't waste your time. I'm offering you a full-time position as a site worker. The pay is fair, the hours are steady, and if you prove yourself, there's room to grow. Daniel felt his breath catch. A full-time position. James nodded. You have experience with tools, right? Yes, sir. I worked in auto repair for years. I've also done carpentry, plumbing, electrical work, whatever I could find. James smiled. That's exactly the kind of worker I need. Daniel hesitated. I don't have certifications or anything. James waved a hand dismissively. I can get you trained. What I can't train is work ethic and integrity. You already have those. Daniel swallowed hard. What's the pay? James named a number that made Daniel's head spin. It was more than enough to cover rent, food, and even put some money aside for emergencies. I don't know what to say, Daniel admitted. Say yes, James said simply. Daniel let out a shaky breath. He had spent so long struggling that he almost couldn't believe this was happening, but it was real. He looked James in the eye and nodded. Yes, I'll take the job. James smiled and extended his hand again. Welcome to Parker Construction, Daniel. Daniel shook his hand firmly, a sense of relief washing over him. For the first time in a long time, things were looking up. Daniel's first day at Parker Construction was tougher than he expected, but he didn't complain. He showed up early, eager to prove himself, and was immediately put to work at a new housing development site. The labor was demanding hauling materials, measuring and cutting wood, assisting the more experienced workers, but Daniel didn't mind. Every ache in his muscles, every bead of sweat that dripped from his brow, reminded him that he was finally working toward something stable. At lunch, he sat on an overturned bucket, eating a sandwich he had packed from home. The other workers were friendly enough, though many seemed curious about him. You're the guy Mr. Parker hired out of nowhere, huh? A stocky man named Lewis asked, unwrapping a burrito. Daniel nodded. Yeah, I guess so. Lewis chuckled. He doesn't usually do that. You must have made an impression. Daniel shrugged, not sure what to say. He didn't want to talk about how he had found James' mother wandering the streets. That wasn't why he was here. He was here to work. By the end of the week, Daniel's hands were calloused, his body sore, but he had never felt prouder. He received his first paycheck, more money than he'd seen in months, and immediately went to the grocery store, filling the cart with fresh fruits, vegetables, and even a little treat for Lily. That night, as they ate dinner, Lily beamed at him. "I like your new job, Daddy." Daniel chuckled, "Me too, sweetheart." But just as things were starting to look up, life threw another challenge his way. The following Monday, Daniel was assigned to a particularly difficult roofing job. The sun was relentless, beating down on him as he worked alongside another laborer, nailing shingles into place. He was careful, he always was, but one misstep sent a bundle of shingles sliding off the roof. Instinctively, Daniel lunged to stop them, but in doing so, he lost his footing. He barely had time to react before he was tumbling down the sloped roof. He twisted his body at the last second, avoiding a direct fall to the ground, but his side slammed hard against the scaffolding before he crashed onto a pile of stacked plywood. Pain exploded in his ribs. The next thing he knew, Lewis and another worker were kneeling beside him. "Don't move, man," Lewis said. "You took a rough fall." Daniel gritted his teeth. "I'm fine." "You're not fine, you're going to the hospital." Daniel wanted to argue, but the sharp pain in his ribs told him otherwise. At the hospital, the doctor confirmed what Daniel already suspected: 2 cracked ribs. "You're lucky," the doctor said. "It could have been much worse, but you need to rest for at least 4 weeks. No heavy lifting, no strenuous activity." Daniel's stomach sank. 4 weeks without work? He had just started. What if James fired him? What if they went right back to struggling? As if on cue, his phone buzzed. James' name flashed on the screen. Daniel hesitated before answering. "Mr. Parker." "I heard what happened," James said. "Are you okay?" Daniel sighed. "Cracked ribs. Doctor says I need to rest for a few weeks." There was a pause, then James spoke firmly. "Take the time you need." Daniel frowned. "I can't afford to." "I'll make sure you're paid while you recover." Daniel sat up in shock, wincing at the pain. "What?" "You heard me. You got hurt on my site. You're a valuable worker, Daniel. I'm not letting you go just because of bad luck." Daniel's throat tightened. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll rest and get better," James replied. "I'll check in on you soon." As the call ended, Daniel sat in stunned silence. For the first time in years, he wasn't alone in his struggles. Someone had his back. When he got home, Lily gently hugged him, careful not to press against his injured ribs. "You're going to be okay, Daddy," she said confidently. Daniel smiled, feeling something he hadn't in a long time: security. He was finally on solid ground. The next few weeks were a test of patience for Daniel. He wasn't used to sitting still, especially when there was work to be done. But James had been firm: he was to rest, recover, and not worry about his job. True to his word, James made sure Daniel's paycheck kept coming, and for the first time in years, Daniel didn't have to constantly calculate whether he had enough to get by. At first, it felt strange to not wake up before dawn and head to a job site. Instead, he spent his mornings helping Lily get ready for school, something he hadn't been able to do regularly before. She beamed every time he walked her to the bus stop, chattering about her day, her friends, and what she was learning. "This is nice," she said one morning, squeezing his hand. Daniel smiled. "Yeah, it is." With his extra time, he also checked in on Evelyn Parker. True to her request, he and Lily visited her once a week. Her home was a beautiful, sprawling house on the nicer side of town, though it was clear she didn't care much for its grandeur. "I don't need all this space," she told Daniel one afternoon as they sat in her sunlit living room. "I'd trade it all for a little cottage with a garden." Daniel chuckled. "Why don't you move then?" Evelyn sighed. "James worries about me enough as it is. He thinks I need people around in case I get confused again." Daniel understood. He saw the way James watched his mother, always making sure she was okay. He could only imagine how hard it must be to see a parent slowly lose their ability to remember. One afternoon, Evelyn insisted on making tea, though Daniel ended up helping her when she forgot where she had placed the sugar. "I suppose it's good I have you two around," she admitted with a small smile. "Otherwise, I'd be drinking the world's most bitter tea." Lily giggled and handed her the sugar. "We like being here." Evelyn looked at Lily fondly. "You're a sweet girl, my dear." Then she turned to Daniel. "And you, Mr. Harper, are a good man." Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, feeling a little awkward. "Just doing what I can." Evelyn tilted her head. "That's more than most." A few days later, James stopped by Daniel's apartment unannounced. Daniel was surprised to see him standing at the door, dressed casually for once, in jeans and a sweater. "James, everything okay?" James gave him a small smile. "I should be asking you that." Daniel stepped aside to let him in. "I'm healing. Slowly, but the doctor says I'm on track." James nodded, looking around the modest apartment. "I wanted to check in, and also, I need to ask you something." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" James hesitated, then sighed. "I need someone I trust to help me with my mother." Daniel blinked in surprise. "Evelyn." James nodded. "She's getting worse. She doesn't say it, but I can tell. I've been looking for someone who can keep her company, help her out when I can't be there, someone she trusts." Daniel's stomach tightened. "James, I don't know anything about being a caretaker." "I'm not asking you to be a nurse," James interrupted. "I just need someone who can check in, run errands with her, make sure she's okay, and if anything happens, call me." Daniel hesitated. He had bonded with Evelyn over the past few weeks, but this was a big responsibility. James must have sensed his hesitation because he added, "I'll pay you, Daniel, a fair wage. It won't be forever, just until we figure out a long-term solution." Daniel exhaled slowly. He had never expected this, but when he thought about Evelyn, her kind eyes, her gentle spirit, the way she already felt like family, it didn't feel like a chore. It felt right. "All right," Daniel said finally. "I'll do it." James let out a breath of relief. "Thank you." Daniel nodded. "She's a good woman. She deserves to be looked after." James smiled, looking both grateful and tired. "Yeah, she does." As James left, Daniel sat on the couch, processing everything. His life had changed so much in just a few weeks. He had a job, security, and now, a role that mattered beyond just making ends meet. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he belonged somewhere. The weeks that followed settled into a new kind of rhythm for Daniel. His ribs were healing well, and though he wasn't quite ready to return to the construction site, he found himself busier than ever helping Evelyn. She had taken to calling him her assistant, though she never treated him like an employee. Instead, their days together felt more like time spent with family. He drove her to appointments, helped her organize the house when she misplaced things, and sat with her as she told stories about her past, some of which she repeated, but Daniel never minded. Lily adored her too. Whenever she wasn't in school, she would sit beside Evelyn, drawing pictures while Evelyn knitted small scarves and mittens for her. It was a quiet, unexpected kind of happiness, and Daniel found himself grateful for it. One afternoon, as Daniel helped Evelyn sort through old photo albums, she sighed and looked at him thoughtfully. "You remind me of my husband," she said suddenly. Daniel glanced up from the pile of photos in his hands. "I do." Evelyn nodded. "He was a hard worker like you, always putting others first, even when things were tough." Daniel smiled softly. "He sounds like a good man." "He was," she said, running her fingers over an old photograph. "And you, Daniel, are a good man, too." He swallowed past the lump in his throat. He wasn't sure if he had ever been called that so genuinely before. Just then, James arrived at the house. He had been stopping by more often, making sure his mother was comfortable, and that Daniel had everything he needed to help her. "Daniel," James said, stepping into the living room, "can we talk for a minute?" Daniel stood, dusting off his jeans. "Of course." James led him outside to the back porch, where the late afternoon sun cast a warm, golden glow. He leaned against the railing, crossing his arms. "I've been thinking a lot about the future," James said. "For my mother, for the company, for everything." Daniel nodded, waiting for him to continue. "You've been a huge help not just to my mom, but to me," James admitted. "It's been a long time since I've trusted someone this much with something so personal." Daniel looked down, unsure of what to say. James took a deep breath. "I don't want you to just be a temporary employee, Daniel." Daniel's head snapped up. "What do you mean?" "I want to offer you a permanent position at Parker Construction," James said seriously. "Not just as a laborer, but eventually as a site manager. I've seen how you work, how you handle responsibility. You're the kind of person I need leading a team." Daniel's breath caught in his throat. A site manager? That was a position that came with real stability, real opportunity, more than he had ever dreamed of. "I don't know what to say," Daniel admitted. "Say yes," James said with a small smile. Daniel hesitated, not out of doubt, but because it all felt so surreal. Just weeks ago, he had been struggling to put food on the table. Now, he was being offered a future he had never thought possible. Finally, he met James' gaze and nodded. "Yes, I'd be honored." James extended his hand, and Daniel shook it firmly. As they stood there, the weight of his struggles felt lighter than ever before. He had started this journey with nothing but a kind heart and a willingness to help. And in return, life had given him more than he could have hoped for: a job, financial security, and a family he hadn't even realized he was missing. That evening, when Daniel returned home, Lily ran up to him, her eyes bright. "How was your day, Daddy?" Daniel scooped her up carefully, mindful of his ribs, and smiled. "It was a good day, sweetheart," he said, holding her close. "A really good day." And for the first time in a long time, he truly believed it.